This sous vide machine is the secret to cooking a perfect steak every single time. Completely foolproof. I'm gonna walk you through the process step by step, show you the equipment, how to use it, and everything you're gonna need to know to make sure that you get this cook just right. But that's not all, because while this steak is cooking to juicy perfection, we're gonna whip up a mouth-watering cowboy butter that is the perfect thing to dip this steak in. Trust me, once you try this combo, you're never gonna wanna cook steak any other way ever again. For the full ingredient list, check the description box below, but enough talking, let's get cooking. So before we get to the steaks, let me show you the essential equipment that you're gonna need to sous vide. So here I got this Anova sous vide machine. This is gonna be your standard and best sous vide machine. It's not very pricey. I've had this one for years and it works like a charm. It's super easy to use. This is gonna be a really good choice for a sous vide machine. The other thing that you're gonna need is gonna be this square container. It's got a lid that's got a little hole for the sous vide machine right on the side. The lid is very essential because it's got to sit for a while, and the lid is going to keep the moisture from evaporating. I've seen stuff with like ping pong balls on top. I don't understand that at all. I mean, that might stop it, but then you have all these ping pong balls. This lid with this flap top and the little hole is all you'll need. Let's get this filled up with hot water. We're going to get it up to temperature. That's going to take a little bit of time, so let's do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the hot water run so it gets as hot as possible. We're going to fill the container up with the hot water from the tap, and that's going to get it as close to our cooking temperature as possible, so we're gonna not have to wait a long time for the water to come up to temperature. So I'm gonna fill this pretty close to the top, not all the way, because we still have to put in the sous vide machine and the steak, so that's gonna displace some water. We don't have to want to take any water out. That's just gonna be a pain in the butt, and if it's filled all the way up to the top, it's gonna be hard to handle. So now that this is filled up, let's get the sous vide machine inside. So the sous vide machine just sits right in there, right in this nice holder. I can pull the machine out, I can put it back in. It's really easy, simple to set up. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna turn it on, and then we're gonna use this dial to bring the temp to 129. 129 is where I like to sous vide steaks to get them to a medium rare. If you like your temperature up a little higher, bring it up a little bit. If you like it even more rare and you want it raw, you can bump it down a little bit more too. But one of the great parts about this machine is how precise you can be with the cooking, and I found that 129 is a go-to for a medium rare steak. While this is warming up, let me show you the steaks and how I prepare them for the bath. So today we're gonna be cooking up these New York strips. This will work for any steak. This is just the steak that I'm choosing to do for this recipe. You gotta see that these have nice meat here, but they have this nice fat cap. These guys are super thick too, so these are probably almost 2 inches thick. This would take a little bit to get up to temperature in the pan. We could do the reverse sear, but this is where the sous vide comes in, because we could make this picture perfect medium rare or any temperature that you would like. So I got them resting on a paper towel. That's going to absorb some of the moisture. The drier the steak is, the less likely it is to steam, and the more likely it is to get a nice crust on the outside. What we're going to do is we're going to take some paper towel and we're going to dry off the top of the steaks. I like to sear the steaks before and after they go into the sous vide. I used to do it just after, but I found that that becomes an essential step that really helps, and it's definitely worth the extra step. You get a really nice crust on the outside, and the crust is the thing that you're after on a steak, because you really only have to do two things. You got to cook it to the perfect temperature inside uniformly, and you got to get a good crust to the outside, and that is the secret to a fabulous steak. These steaks don't need much, so we're just going to put on some olive oil for a little binder, and then we're going to hit them with the salt and pepper. We don't need to go crazy with the olive oil, just a little drizzle on top, and I find that if I can drizzle one side, I'll rub it in, and then I'll flip them over and just use my hand to get the oil on the other side. We don't need much, we just want a little bit on the outside to allow the salt and pepper to stick nicely, and also to get the initial sear on them. These are going to render off plenty of fat, but just having a little bit of oil on the outside helps the process get started better. So now we're going to use some kosher salt that we're going to sprinkle on top. And remember, sprinkle always nice and high. And these steaks are super thick, so you are more likely to under-season them than you are to over-season them. So you can be pretty liberal with your salt unless you're watching your blood pressure, and then maybe you use whatever you think's right for you. So we're going to go salt on one side, and now pepper. I'll give them a flip and do the other side. Now I like to take the steaks and I like to take that fat cap on the side and just rub it just with the salt and pepper that kind of fell off to the sides, and that should be enough to season that part of the meat. Remember, these are big pieces of meat that you can only get the seasoning on the outside. You can't get it in on the inside. So you want to make sure that there's enough on the outside of every bite that's really going to enhance the flavor of this beautiful meat. So now that these are seasoned, we need to sear them. You can do this on the grill or you can do this in a cast iron pan. We're going to do it in a cast iron pan. Right now I'm getting my deck worked on, so the grill is off limits for today and for the next couple of days, but we're going to do this inside in the cast iron pan. So let's head over to the stove. So now I'm gonna get this cast iron pan hot over high heat. I'm gonna wait till this thing is smoking. You wanna make sure that the pan is very, very hot, because once you put these cold steaks in, the temperature is gonna come down. We've let the steaks come up to room temperature a little bit, but they're always gonna be a little cold, and that's how cooking works. Heat gets transferred into the food, so the pan's gonna cool down. So the hotter this pan is when we put those steaks in, the better. The pan is dry. I haven't added any oil. I'm just gonna put the steaks in just like that. So this pan is starting to smoke. I'm gonna put the hood on. It is absolutely essential you get some airflow going, either with a hood or open the windows with a fan, because it's about to get smoky in here and you'll put on the fire alarms real quick if you don't have any ventilation. So once I think this pan is hot enough, you can always check just by holding your hand. If you can only hold it there for a few seconds, it probably is, and it's giving off this smoke. I'm gonna take the steak and put it with the fat cap down. I'm only gonna do 2 at a time, but I'm gonna start with the fat cap because it's gonna allow some of the fat to render into the pan before we do the surfaces of the steak. These steaks are thick enough that I can just put them on their side and they'll stay. If you're having problems do that, you could always lean them up against the side or you could lean them together. But the more space in between them, the better, because space allows things to get hot. When things are crowded in a pan, they tend to steam. There's no place for the moisture to escape. So you can see that the fat is starting to render out of this fat cap, so we're getting that nice beef tallow. Beef tallow is great to sear steaks in, so you don't have to add any oil. The great thing about these steaks is they come with the cooking fat built right in. You just gotta sear this side first. After about a minute, you can see that we're getting a nice crust on the outside of this. We've definitely rendered off some fat. We're gonna do this process again later, but now let's flip these steaks and get the surface side of them. Make sure that as I flip them, I give them a nice press down to make sure they're getting good contact. And here I'm using metal. When you're doing high heat cooking, get rid of your plastic and your silicone. This is way too hot. That's why you need these cheap little metal ones. They work great for this and they're not gonna melt from the super high heat that we're working with. So after about 2 minutes to each side, we got a decent sear on both, so we're gonna take these off. I'm gonna let the pan reclaim some heat before we put our other 2 steaks in. I'm just gonna let it sit there on the high heat, let the temperature come up a little bit, and then we'll repeat that process for the other steaks. So now I'm gonna shut the heat off on this pan and just let it cool down. After we sous vide these steaks, we're gonna cook them and sear them for the final time right in this same pan. So we can just leave it like that and only have to clean it once. I think there's 2 more essential pieces of equipment. You're gonna need some vacuum sealer food bags and you're gonna need the vacuum sealer. A vacuum sealer is a very multi-purpose kitchen tool. I don't put anything in the freezer for long term without vacuum sealing. It really helps and it is awesome for sous vide. Yeah, you could do it in just a plastic bag, but this makes it way better. So I'm gonna cut a few sections of bags and I'm gonna seal these up, and then we're gonna get the steaks in there with a few other things. Always make sure that you're cutting your lines nice and straight, so when this goes into the vacuum seal, that it's got a nice straight line. And usually what I do is I just take these, if I'm gonna do a bunch of them, here we're gonna do 2, because we're gonna do 2 steaks in each one. Just cut it about the same length. So now before we get the steaks in there, let's seal one side of the bag. So I always make sure that I inspect the seal. You wouldn't want this to open up once this is inside the water, but if it looks pretty good, what we're gonna do is we're gonna put our steaks in there. I like to open up the bag a little bit to make sure that I get a nice easy transfer. I'm trying to keep the bag as clean as possible as I'm putting them in. So now I'm gonna put in some garlic. Before I put the fresh garlic in, I'm gonna give it a little smash. We don't have to trim the root end off the garlic. This garlic is not making it into our food. Right here, I got about 2 cloves of garlic for each steak, and I'm just giving it a smash to release the juice from the garlic so that flavor permeates into the sous vide bags. If you put them in whole, they won't release, and if you cut them up too much, it's gonna be really hard to take off the garlic after we're done. So I'm gonna split this into 2 piles, and I'm gonna sprinkle this just right over the top of the steaks. You don't have to be super exact when you're placing this stuff. I like to spread it out a little bit. When this thing gets all sealed up, all the juices are gonna go all inside the bag, and they'll even themselves out. You just gotta help it out a little bit. So now we're gonna put in some fresh herbs. Here I got some rosemary, I got some sage, I got some oregano, and some thyme. All of this came out of my garden. If I had to pick one, I would probably put the thyme in, but I got all these fresh herbs, and I think fresh herbs, it really adds amazing flavor to this. So let's take a little bit of each one of these and sprinkle them around. So a little bit of the rosemary, a little sage, some of this oregano. And again, you don't have to be super precise, just put it in there and kind of spread it out, and a little bit of the thyme. Or thyme. Let me know in the comment section how you say that. Is it thyme or thyme? Because it's got the H in there, but everybody says thyme, and then they make the joke that it sounds like thyme, but it's spelled thyme. Thyme? You could put a pat of butter in here, but we're gonna skip that step. We're gonna be making that compound cowboy butter that we're gonna be dipping the steak into, so we don't need to over butter these. And I find that once you get the garlic and the herbs and they're seasoned on the outside and they got the sear, it really doesn't need the butter, and we're gonna be putting the butter on after, so we're gonna skip that step. But if you're not making the cowboy butter and you want these steaks to be good just like this, I would just put a tablespoon of butter in each one. But one thing we are going to put in is this juice that collected on this plate. We got a no flavors left behind policy, and this stuff is gold. So I'm just going to pour a little bit into each bag. Now before we seal these up, I'm going to make sure that the top of the bags are nice and dry. Right on the inside where it seals, I'm just going to take a piece of paper towel and rub it really gently and dry out just where we're going to seal it. This makes sure that when we seal up the bag that the seal is really tight. Again, we don't want the seal to bust and water to get possibly in there. That defeats the whole purpose of the bag. So now I'm going to put the edge of the bag inside the space. We're gonna close this up. I don't even know if this really makes a difference, but I'm gonna set this to moist. We're gonna put this on gentle, and we're gonna hit vac seal. As the vacuum sealer is working, I'm gonna try to just help it out a little bit and push the air out of the bag. It'll eventually suck it all out, but it saves a lot of time if I can just kind of influence it out of there. Once I think we're good, I'm gonna hit the seal button. And now we have our nice sous vide steak bag all set up. We got the steaks in there, the garlic, the herbs. This is good to go. Let's seal up the other one. I'm just gonna open up the lid, put these inside, and they're gonna stay in there for about an hour. I'm gonna make sure that they're fully submerged. I like to take the top edge of the bag and I leave myself a little extra room, and I just close the lid right on it so it'll hold the steaks in and this part won't get wet and go inside the water. These I'm gonna save, and I'm gonna put them in the freezer and save them for a busy weeknight. You can sous vide stuff that's completely frozen. You just gotta add about 50% more time. So those steaks are gonna go in there for an hour. When I cook these later, I'll put them in for about 90 minutes and they'll still reach the same exact temperature. We're gonna let those cook for about an hour so they get to temperature. But one of the great parts about sous vide is that you do not need to take them out after an hour. You can leave them in for an hour. You can leave them in for 2, maybe even 3. I don't like to sous vide steaks for super long. I think once you leave it past like the 2 or 3 hour mark, the texture starts to change a little bit, even though it's not cooking anymore. One of the great parts is you are not time pressured to end the cook time. It's just gonna bring it up to temperature and hold. So while those are coming up to temperature, let's make that delicious cowboy butter. It's super simple and we'll have plenty of time to do it. We only have to prep 2 things for the cowboy butter. So we're gonna chop up some parsley and we're gonna put a mince on this garlic. Here I got about 8-10 cloves of garlic. You know, feel free to use as much garlic as you'd like. I've never seen someone use too much garlic. For this cowboy butter, we're gonna put a really fine mince on this garlic to make sure that with each bite, there's just a little bit and there's no super big chunks of garlic. You can use the pre-minced stuff, but I always like going fresh. And by all means, feel free to use less garlic, but we're going garlic level 9,000 on this one. So now let's melt some butter. We're gonna throw in 1 stick of butter into this pan. I like to start butter when I'm melting it at a low temperature and let it melt slowly. This is gonna avoid burning it. Also too, whenever I'm using the electric stovetops, I find it really hard to control the heat. I know in some parts of the country you only have electric stovetops and you don't have gas available. I don't know, gas is just way easier to cook with for me. So here we're gonna put in 1 stick of butter. As that's melting, we're gonna throw in our garlic, some Dijon mustard, some Worcestershire sauce. I ain't saying Worcestershire, so once we got that Worcester pronunciation, this makes this sauce a whole lot easier to use, and it's delicious. The juice from 1 lemon, some smoked paprika. You can use regular paprika, but the smoked paprika really adds that nice smoky flavor that I guess makes this cowboy butter. I don't think cowboys would ever have this many ingredients. I don't even know why it's called cowboy butter, but it is absolutely delicious. Now we're gonna take some of that same thyme that we used for the steaks, and we're just gonna clip off little bits of that. Not much, the fresh stuff can go a long way, so we just need a little bit. Now, this is an ingredient that I haven't seen in a whole lot of cowboy butters, but I like to put a little barbecue sauce in there. When I'm thinking cowboy, I'm thinking barbecue sauce, and barbecue sauce is delicious. It adds a really nice, unique flavor to this butter dipping sauce. You can use any barbecue sauce you'd like. Here, I'm using Stubbs because this is more of a vinegar-based barbecue sauce than it is super sweet. Because I don't want this to be very sweet, but this adds that a really nice flavor. Now we're gonna add a little crushed red pepper, a little salt, and some fresh ground black pepper. Almost forgot the parsley. We don't need the whole thing. We're just gonna put a big pinch of it in there. You can never chop up too much parsley. I throw this in the fridge and it just sprinkles on everything we're gonna eat for the next couple days. Now we'll give this a little mix. If we mix this with a whisk, I think we can get a nice smoother consistency. So we're incorporating all the Dijon mustard and the solids from the butter, and we can get a nice, smooth, uniform sauce. The color of this is unreal. I love this like dark brown leather tobacco color, and it smells unbelievable. And this does not need to cook for long, just enough for the flavors of the garlic and everything to come together into the sauce. Once this is cooked for a few minutes, we're gonna shut it off the heat and we're gonna wait for our steaks to finish sous videing. So these have been in the sous vide for about an hour at that 129 temperature. Let's take them out and let them cool. I like to let the steaks cool in the bag, in the liquid, before we take them out. So I'm gonna put this on a wire rack. I just got some paper towel underneath to absorb any moisture, and I'm gonna let these sit here for about 5-10 minutes before we take them out of the bag. They're not very hot because they only get up to 129, so they'll cool off pretty quickly. I think that if you take meat that is cooking in liquid out too quick, the meat has a tendency to dry out. We're gonna wanna make sure that the steak is nice and moist, and I don't think this affects the sear at all. So let's let these cool down, and then we'll take them out of the bag and sear them in the cast iron. While these are cooling down, we can clean this up, and all we got to do is dump the water out. There's nothing to clean. There's no mess. We put the machine back, we put the container back, and nothing ever got dirty. It's so easy to use and super duper helpful. This is one of the reasons I absolutely love cooking with the sous vide. Not only is it easy, it's foolproof, it also cleans up in a breeze. So now that these steaks have cooled down, I can touch them and they feel very room temperature. I'm gonna open up this bag and I'm gonna place them on top of this grate, and underneath the grate on the plate, I got some paper towel just to absorb any moisture that hits the plate. It's the same paper towel that was underneath this when I took the bag out. So now we're gonna take the steaks out. I'm just gonna use my hand, and I'm gonna leave in the garlic and the herbs. They've already done their job, and gave their flavors to the steak. And we're gonna pull these out and get them a little dry before we sear them. And now these steaks are fully cooked to that 129, so we don't need to do anything to them other than get a sear on the outside. These herbs and garlic have already done their job and gave their flavor over, so they can just get thrown right in the trash. I'll take a paper towel and I'll just pat it very gently on the outside to make sure we're not removing any of the seasoning, but I'm gonna do this just to get off any moisture that is on the outside of these. The drier the surface of the steak, the better crust that we're gonna get on them. And these do not need to cool down that much. They are already cooked to temperature, and that temperature was 129, so they don't need to come down from 200, 300, 400. They just need to come down a little bit. We wanna make sure that they're pretty cool before we sear them, because the hotter the meat is, the more carryover is gonna come from the sear, and we just wanna sear the outside and not touch the inside temperature at all. So I took that same pan, I just left the beef tallow in there. It's now nice and hot. We're gonna put the steaks in and we're gonna get a sear on all sides. There is a little fat in the pan, but I'm gonna take a little bit of olive oil and just rub it on top of the steak. Again, just so that first contact is nice and hot with a little bit of oil. So a lot of fat's still gonna render out of this steak, especially from that fat cap. So I'm gonna put these down oil side and give them a nice press. I'm gonna let these sear for about 2 minutes on each side. Now look at that amazing crust on the outside of that steak. That color is unreal. Once we got nice color on both sides, we're gonna hit that fat cap up one more time. The more that fat cap renders, the less likely it is to be chewy, and the more likely it is to be a delicious, a little crunchy, and completely melt in your mouth kind of fat, not the chewy fat that everybody always pulls out of their mouth or cuts off the steak. Not only are we gonna get that fat cap, I'm gonna even sear the inside edge here. It's just not looking like the same color, and I know we can get a little color on it, and more color is always more flavor. So once we've got nice color on all sides of the steak, we're gonna take it out, put it back on the wire rack, and let it cool before we slice it. So now that these steaks have cooled for a little bit, let's cut into them and let's see how we did. Let's also not forget this delicious cowboy butter. This cowboy butter smells absolutely delicious. I can't wait to cut the steak and dip it in there. So now let's slice into this and let's see how we did. So with a nice sharp knife, we're gonna cut pieces about a 1/2 inch thick. I wouldn't go very thin for this steak. I mean, this steak's gonna be super tender. So about a 1/2 inch is a really good thickness for cutting these premium steaks. You can see that the fat that fell off right here, it's rendered really nicely. It's got this nice crisp on the outside. This is even a delicious bite all by itself. And yeah, you can see we got this really nice medium rare piece, so it's got that perfect pink center. This is gonna be a absolutely delicious bite of steak. I am so excited to try this. This is an epic bite. This steak by itself tastes fantastic, but with this cowboy butter, holy cow. I mean, now I'm even eating the side with a little fat cap on it. This is so delicious. Look at this steak. So wall-to-wall perfection, nice medium rare. You can see that the line of cook on the outside and the line of cook on the bottom and the sides is all about even. That's one of the things you're looking for in a well-cooked steak, that it doesn't have this like blend. That the middle is as cooked and evenly as possible. This is so good. And this cowboy butter is out of control. So good. My teeth cut through this thing so good. This is so delicious. You can even pull it apart. I mean, if you have steak that you can't pull apart, it's probably pretty chewy, but I mean, that just pulled right apart super easy. This is so good. This steak came out absolutely unbelievable. While I'm finishing up this steak, check out my Caesar salad video. That is a great side to make to this steak. I'll see you there. Thanks.